Okay, well, hello again for those who have been here at the hour, and welcome to those who just joined in. My name is Angel. I'm an associate in agriculture at Deep Science Ventures. And today I'm going to talk to you a bit about this very exciting new opportunity that we have in DSV Agri. Before joining DSV, I've been working with a diverse set of crops, from breeding to genetic engineering, with the goal of achieving food security, productivity, and sustainable agriculture. And I am very, very excited to share about this new opportunity to join and work with DSV. So to get us started, I'm going to share a little bit about what Deep Science Version does and how we go about our venture building process. Then I'll share a little bit more detail about the project I am leading in the agricultural sector and the rationale and objectives that I have associated with this opportunity area, and the founding analyst role from which I am currently recruiting. Therefore, to this end, I'm going to share about the recruitment process for someone to come and join us and actually making all of this happen. Note that we are specialists in company building, and we're looking to you as experts on this subject. So what I have done today in the presentation is that I have taken a generalist approach to the concept that the repertoire of crops that we have currently going into the 21st century is going to have to change. So we have been using a first principles thinking approach where we uncover the constraints that need solving to achieve the ultimate outcome that we need to achieve, which is creating circular economies through next generation of crops. So we're coming to you through this webinar and looking for that really talented founder with the right technical expertise to come on board with us to join to build something really, really exciting. So what is Deep Science Ventures? So we're a team of scientists that are focusing on building businesses that solve big problems. We create new startups with new teams that we recruit around the world to develop new intellectual property. With that said, we're not an accelerator or an incubator, but we're rather a venture builder studio. And therefore, we recruit founder type scientists to work together with them to develop the novel approaches to solve some of the biggest challenges we face for creating a sustainable and thriving future, which is the mission of DSV. We create companies in 4 sectors. We do therapeutics to cure diseases with emerging techniques, computing, thinking about how we can tackle the barriers for intelligence and automation, climate, how we can go about delivering a net zero transition, and in agriculture, where we're focusing on restorative cultivation and everything associated with improving our food production systems and ecosystem health. In the last 5 years, we have built 35 companies across our 4 sectors, averaging 18 months from incorporation of these companies to reaching technology's readiness level 4. And now we have a total valuation across these companies that exceeds 210 million pounds. With our extensive list of partners and funders that help us with our venture building process, which I'll explain later, we have achieved an 89% of our portfolio companies that we have formed remaining active. So as you can see, we have a really good success with our founders for building impactful companies. So the way that we go about building companies is that we have a novel venture creation process called the DSV Alpha, where we used first principles thinking approach to venture building to overcome the traditional barriers in science commercialization. At Deep Science Ventures, this process can be easily broken down into 8 steps. The first 4 stages we have handled in-house by our core team. And this is really where we are focusing on identifying that opportunity area and the right founder within that opportunity area. So in step 1, what we try to identify are those sector level areas that are underperforming relative to what it's possible. In other words, what are the problems that need solving at this current day and age? So there are really big picture challenges. For example, soil degradation in agriculture, which presents a whole set of different challenges in different contexts across the globe. Once we have identified what is the big problem that needs solving, then we go about forming partnerships, which are with mission-aligned groups that we can collaborate to gain their input into shaping these specific opportunities by leveraging from their networks, their knowledge, their experience, allowing us to clearly formulate what outcomes need to be met to solve this big picture problem. Once we have identified the outcomes that need to be achieved, we develop what is called the opportunity areas. And this is what step 3 is about. So these are areas that we feel that they will benefit from our methodology. And these areas could be as specific as, for example, precision pest control, soil regeneration, or even expanding the use case of crops. We evaluate the opportunity areas to fulfill our criteria, which include things like market potential, human and planetary outcomes that can be delivered by solving problems in this area, and of course, the identification of areas of neglect that themselves can be opportunities to bring novel solutions and make a real impact in that area. Once we're confident, we move to step 4, which is to find that right founder. And the right founder is that person that has a strong entrepreneurial characteristic, unbiased by any particular IP, but has a deep technical knowledge that is relevant to the opportunity area. Once we bring that founder on board, then we push forward to the following 4 stages, where they're really focusing on deconstructing this opportunity in detail to build a company from scratch. So in that step 5, at the deconstruction stage, we share our work regarding the opportunity areas so the founder can evaluate our research from an expert point of view. And the founder takes a first principles approach to really understand the past failures of companies trying to solve for the challenges in the area, and thinking about areas of neglect that where potential solutions might have been overlooked for whatever reason. And this is actually where the fun happens between the sector and the founding analysts, just bouncing ideas and exploring the areas of possibility and asking questions that nobody has asked before. Then through that exercise, we then begin the potential approaches with consultation from advisors and other contexts to start building out approaches that can form a venture backable company. And this loop is applied several times. Once we get to the point that the founder has developed a short list of approaches that they think are really exciting, we then help them start building out the co-founding team. So with that could trying to bring the co-founding team, we start bringing a co-founder that may fill any gaps in terms of either technical or commercial expertise to get the company off the ground once it's incorporated. And the last 2 steps, 7 and 8, are really focused on integrating proven knowledge as well as IP component to test the riskiest aspects of the company at the early stage. And lastly, from that point that the company has launched and with receiving 250,000 pounds of pre-seed investment from us at the point of incorporation with founder-friendly terms, that gets the company off the ground and running. So what I share with you is the company-wide approach of how we go about venture building. And this is the approach that we applied at DSV Agriculture, where our main outcome, the big problem we want to solve, is by enabling regenerative cultivation. And what does this mean? So what this means is that we want to build solutions that eliminate or offset intense and extractive agriculture to a more sustainable production system that results in restoring ecosystems and environmental services. And as you could appreciate, agriculture is quite diverse. So thus, in order to create scalability and impact, we see agriculture through a bioregional lens. And what we mean is that every production system that is within agriculture happens in a very discrete geographical area. And this geographical area is defined by an ecological system and a biome that is contained within that system, adapted to a climate that could be replicated in different range of continents. So a problem in a tropical region in the Americas could be used to solve a problem in the tropical regions in the Asian Pacific as an example. So thinking about problems this way and solutions this way in this bioregional lens, it can help us ensure the impact and scalability of the startup. And we have started this bioregional lens several years ago with our first venture building program with this concept that it was building companies in the temperate regions. The program was called the Food and Agricultural Science Transformer, which was comprised of 3 opportunity areas: controlled environment agriculture, regenerative aquaculture, and pollinator reinforcement. And it was based in Scotland. And within our DSV Alpha approach, within 18 months, we launched 2 startup companies coming from the FAST program. Rhizocore Technologies came out from the Controlled Environment Agriculture Opportunity Area. When using first principles approach, Toby made the connection that if we were to use this technology to cultivate and curate mycorrhizal fungi, this fungi could then be used to inoculate trees for reforestation purposes. So not only would increase the tree growth and survival, but also its carbon sequestration potential. From the regenerative aquaculture opportunity area, Aquanso emerged. And here what Aquanso was, what Remy, the founder for Aquanso, was looking at is like, what sustainable feeds can we come up with to give to the aquaculture system. And what he did was he flipped the assumption that we needed alternative proteins for aquaculture and asked the question, could we already produce marine protein that is present in the ocean in a controlled environment? Therefore, you have 0 ocean required. And what you could see is that in the very, very short period of time, they have had a substantial list of achievements and they're having great traction, making them very successful companies. And I encourage you to visit their websites to learn more about what they're up to. Currently, we are now having a venture builder program in the tropics, the Tropical Agriculture and Bioeconomy Initiative that is based in Costa Rica. And the 3 opportunity areas that we have today, that we have in this program, I should say, is biomass conversion for the bioeconomy, adapting tropical farms to climate change, and creating circular bioeconomies through next generation crops, which I will be talking about today. And I am very, very grateful for our partners at Costa Rica that has helped us with all the inputs that led to this program to be launched. So being that said, let's dive in into the new opportunity area of creating circular bioeconomies through next generation crops. So before I dive into the OA, first let's talk a little bit about the concept of bioeconomy and the difference within a circular bioeconomy. So a bioeconomy as a concept, it's actually not that new. What we in a bioeconomy is based on the fact that biological sources are used to be harvested, make products, so we can use those products, and then we dispose those products. As a comparison to, as an alternative to non-renewable petrochemicals, for example. And what the circular bioeconomy comprises of is an economic model that emphasizes the use of renewable capital, but focusing on minimizing waste. Therefore, replacing this wide range of non-renewable and petrochemical products that we currently use. And just by shifting the energy and the extracted system to a circular and resource efficient models, this could lead to business opportunities up to $3.5 trillion and having 87 million jobs by 2030. So by trying to understand how can we enable a circular bioeconomy, we started thinking, what is the most, in agriculture, what are the most common features in the tropics? And we learned that in the tropics, crops are the key to enable circular bioeconomies. They're planted in all the tropics, as well as the tropics tend to be net producers of the products from crops. So that was a great intervention point, but then we started thinking about the crop as an organism, as this venue of enabling bioeconomies. And actually, the reason why they're great is because crops themselves are great molecular factories that can produce a range of products. We are familiar with products such as food and feed, as well as feedstock for the fermentation industry of any different products, to even producing energy. And there's always this great potential that crops can be used to produce a variety of other chemicals that will right now come from extractive sources. So therefore, there's a great way of expanding the range of products produced from crops that may create new opportunities for value creation that can support the growth of local, regional, and national bioeconomies, particularly when we are observing that nations or corporations are aiming to wean themselves off petrochemical inputs. How can we do this? Well, when we look at all the different systems that crops are being used, we can see that we can develop traits that are within established food and feed crops. So in other words, they're synergistic with established traits rather than in competition. For example, using leftover agricultural residue with better digestibility properties for downstream processes. That would be a good example of it. A second way that we can use crops to enable us a bioeconomy is by introducing new crops into existing agricultural regime without seeing this trade-off of yield loss with an existing production system. So for example, follow season or perennial crops that deliver products for the bioeconomy and offer environmental benefits, leading to yield gains from food crops and other food crops and feed crops, as an example. Lastly, we can think beyond farms, where we can develop high-yielding crops for the bioeconomy that can be cultivated in environments unsuitable for food production. Therefore, you remove that direct competition for space and resources, or you can enable their production in a land-efficient manner. So, taking into consideration that crops themselves are great molecular factories to produce all of these great inputs that can enable a circular bioeconomy, and there's already scenarios in which we can make this happen, why aren't crops at the forefront of circular bioeconomies? Well, crops are grown for one purpose, and usually it's either food, feed, or a source of energy. So there's a narrow vision of their potential. Also, there are underutilization of post-harvest residues. Some of the residues, when they're actually being used, they're used in composting, and there are very little efforts in getting valuable materials out of these residues or seeing these residues as great sources of novel inputs for other industries. Some crops are vegetatively propagated, therefore improvement is very, very complicated. And this is very common with root crops in the tropics, as well as some crops have long breeding cycles. Specifically, those are from tree-like crops like bushes, like for example, coffee, that to get a variety, it may take over a decade just to get a variety that is commercially viable. And lastly, thinking about that, well, for those crops that you cannot breed for, or breeding takes a long time, you can always genetically engineer these crops to get the trait that you need. However, not all crops can be genetically engineered, and the few that can be, they have very low efficiency. So there's this blocker on innovation in regards to bringing those traits that we need in general. So how might we overcome the barriers to get the traits that we need? Well, the first is to think about the first main constraint, and is that we have to shorten breeding cycles. The traditional breeding techniques can be time-consuming and labor-intensive. Therefore, we need new approaches to expedite breeding platforms. When we look at the current state of the art on how you can shorten a breeding cycle, we look at technologies such as somatic variation, double haploid development, mutagenesis, and even controlled environments, mainly using light treatments. However, when you look at what these technologies do, is that they just maximize the genetic diversity within the population, but they themselves do not shorten the reproduction cycle. For example, somatic variation, it depends on tissue culture techniques as well as double haploid development. Sometimes you can do it through tissue culture techniques, or you can do it through an inducer mechanisms. So there's still this limitation of how it can be applied. And of the four state-of-the-art technologies that I mentioned, control environment using light treatments, it's only secluded for those crops that are actually photoperiod sensitive. And that is not the case for all crops in agriculture and tropical agriculture. So thinking about how can we solve for this constraint, we can expedite breeding platforms by developing novel chemistries to reduce the reproduction cycles, either by foliar applications or soil applications, microbial communities, as well as we can bioprospect different organisms or come up with different chemistries that we can then apply to shorten the reproduction cycle. Also, inspired by controlled environment, can we use the environment in different ways to induce breeding, either by using temperature as a trigger, light as a trigger, or mechanical stimuli as a trigger? And in these last parts, when you look at the current crops that use these type of environment inducers to get something out of the crop, they usually involve genetic engineering, which then brings me to the second constraint, which is that we must increase the genetic engineering resources and efficiencies. Because the main issue within this strategy is that the ability to regenerate plants from tissue or cell culture highly depends on the species and the genotypes used. And even if there is a species that can be genetically engineered, they still have a go-to variety that is not commercial to proceed with the entire process to then be bred into the elite line, which then it goes back to our first constraint, which is the breeding cycle. And even within those crops, these varieties that can be transformed, they still have low regeneration rate. So therefore, the genotype dependency and the regeneration rate are the main blockers in genetic engineering efforts. And when we look at the state of the art around these techniques around this problem, we see novel plant hormone treatments either being synthetic or endogenous. We see the use of gene products, mainly tackling morphogenic genes or developmental regulators, that they trigger pathways related to cell identity, meristem development, plant regeneration, and so on. And they're very secluded to a particular set of crops. And also novel vectors where the infection of delivery of the transgene can itself trigger an increase in potential of higher regeneration rate. Most of these strategies are new and are currently being applied in established crop systems and model systems. But we're thinking that we need to go a little bit beyond that. And here, to improve the crop genome platforms and crop-associated biomes, we may consider creating precise chemical mutagens. Right now, we have mutagens that are effective, but they cause random mutations. And still, you need to go through that breeding process, an external laborious breeding process to get that trait of interest. Could we develop a mutagen that has, for example, the specificity of an enzyme, but it's not an enzyme itself? So that would be an area to explore what needs to be true for having such compound exist. Another thing that we are considering is breaking these barriers of genotype and species dependencies for doing genetic engineering by leveraging just basic plant development knowledge to making this happen. And lastly, we're thinking about that we must enhance non-transgenic transformation improvement efforts, because when we look at how it's being done at this moment, most of the successful examples are based on seed crops, which ironically start with a transgenic approach. And once you have that mutation of interest, then the transgene is bred out. But that, like I mentioned, this is secluded only to seed crops. So then when you have crops that do not produce seed, therefore your applications are quite limited. And the non-transgenic intervention that exists have constraints regarding the screening limitations. Because one benefit about having a transgenic crop at the early stages is that you're able to select which ones have that insert, which is not possible with non-transgenic transformation efforts. And this is actually very critical, because as we take a look at the regulation of genetically engineered crops, specifically those that are gene edited, we do see a positive attitude towards adaptation. So what I'm showing you in this image is a map for 3 years ago in 2020 and EMBO reports, where it shows that in green are countries that are regulating gene-edited crops that are non-transgenic as if they were from breeding purposes. So therefore, the main regulatory blockers in crop engineering are removed when you have the transgene out, but even though you go through a gene-edited event. And at 3 years ago, there was a handful of countries that were very acceptive of this technology, and a handful of countries in yellow that were considering changing their regulation to adaptation. As well, there's always a couple of countries that are not accepting them as easy as if they were coming from natural breeding, traditional breeding methods. But as we move into the present, we see that the countries that 3 years ago that were in yellow considering it, now they're adopting it. And we do see that even the countries that are still red, they are reevaluating their status quo, because they do see great potential in this technology to enable their own agriculture systems. So with this in mind, for the crops to get us there, we must overcome the following constraints. And this is by reducing breeding cycles and increasing genetic engineering resources and efficiencies. And if we overcome these constraints, we will be able to customize crops for local, regional, and international needs. We can expand the income sources to farms, and we can reduce the dependency on goods that come from extractive practices that are harmful for the environment. And not only that, the technology, even though that the OA, as I presented it, is focused on using crops, mainly plants, to tackle these constraints, the technologies that will be developed can be easily transferred to other organisms that have a high value potential to this circular bioeconomy, such as different strains of fungi, bacteria, algae, seaweeds, amongst others. So with that, I invite you to let's make the next generation of crops to enable the circular bioeconomy. We are at the stage that we're finding the right founder, which brings me to the final stage of my presentation. I will talk briefly about the recruitment process and the role. As you probably know, the job description is live. So if you haven't seen it, please take a look. And what are we looking for in a founder? So we're looking for someone with a deep technical expertise and knowledge of plant developmental biology, specifically those drivers in plant reproduction and regeneration in any context. We believe that this will be the most helpful skill. And this could be presented in the form of a PhD, but also it could be presented as someone with a master's or a bachelor's with an equivalent experience, with the equivalent experience in the research aspect of this field. And as you can see in the graph on the right, only 61% of our founders do possess a PhD. So it's not a strict requirement. What we care about is the deep knowledge and understanding, as well as you're well informed of the state-of-the-art technologies for new trade development. You must have a desire to build a company with an impact, as well as having industry and startup experience does help in get the ground up and running. And as you can see, about half of the founders through DSV have had industry experience, but most of our founders have had at some point in their career startup experience, which that have that brings the state of mind that will be very, very helpful in beginning this endeavor. Having experience in achieving sustainable goals in the form of circular bioeconomy is very useful, as well as interesting in achieving Costa Rica's national bioeconomy strategy, because this is where we believe this is our primary market, and we believe that the example that we're going to set in Costa Rica will be a great example for Latin America in the midterm, but for the international tropics in the long term. Being this said, knowledge of Spanish and English is going to be beneficial at DSV. We communicate, all our communications are going to be in English. The interviews will be in English. However, knowing that the founder will be interacting with local stakeholders, Spanish is a great asset. And ultimately, having the right skill set of creativity, ambition, technical and commercial thinking. The assessment process is very straightforward. You apply through Workable, and applications are currently being assessed on a rolling basis. And it's a typical 3-step process of 3 interviews and a case study where we assess all the different indicators of that we look for in a successful founder. Our offer to you is that we pay you to start your own company. We give you a monthly stipend, so that gives you guaranteed income before you secure pre-seed investment. Keep in mind that most entrepreneurs that they just want to go by themselves, either they have to go through life savings, or they have to depend on family chipping in, or they would have to work on their free time on this idea of venture creation as they're still continuing to work in their full-time position. So we give you the space and the tranquility of giving you an income as we're thinking about disrupting agriculture. And through this process, not only we give you a stipend, but we are very involved in the process, as well as we are committed to your success in providing support in exploring the approaches that will lead to venture backable companies. This comes back to that deconstruction of the opportunity area and consider all the business aspects as well as the science aspects and figure out the areas of neglect that could themselves become very interesting ways of bringing innovative solutions. With that leads us that we help you build your co-founding team, as well as once you are incorporated, we support you as part of our portfolio companies, and we help you through the different stages going from fundraising, proof of concept documentation, technologies, agreements, and so on and so forth. The experience, it varies between founders. So this is just to give you a general idea what a typical founder journey begins. The first 3 months is just to deconstruct the opportunity area and identify the short list of approaches. This is where the founder and the sector have a highly collaborative discussions on where the innovation should be. And then we start refining the short list of approaches to inform the team building, figuring out what techniques or what commercial skills are needed in order to get the company off and running. And then we start moving into detailed analysis of the technical and commercial feasibility of the promising approaches identified in that stage. And lastly, we start working with you in developing the investment readiness pre-launch with further focus on technical and commercial proof. And after that, voila, the company is incorporated, receiving from DSV 250,000 pounds. And after incorporation, we support you as a portfolio company in raising seed from external VCs and angel investors. So if this opportunity resonates with you, if you find this founder journey quite appealing, please join us. Join us in a DSV Agriculture. Let's achieve a restorative cultivation. Let's enable circular bioeconomies in the tropics. Our team is comprised by Edward Perello, our Associate Director of Agriculture. He himself was a founder of Desktop Genetics, and he has been at the forefront of biosecurity and synthetic biology, being an advisor to government, industry, as well as NGOs. We also have our great head of strategic partnerships for agriculture, Chris Oakes, who has extensive experience in the corporate world, in agriculture, as well in the startup environment. And my colleague, William Summers, who before joining DSV was head of strategic funding of delivery at the BBSRC, and myself, a former academic, turned into an entrepreneur in working in crop improvement technologies. And with that, I am very, very grateful that you took the time on a Friday to watch this webinar, and I'm very thankful for your attendance, and please feel free to ask questions. Thank you. Oh, so there is a Q&A box, so feel free to ask questions. Is there a deadline for the application? No, there is no deadline for the application, but we encourage everybody to apply as soon as possible because we are currently evaluating applications at this moment. Yeah. I believe we're gonna get, this is recorded and it will be sent next week. So Harry, who would be the best person to reach out to discuss future relationship with companies that come out of this program? So that would be Chris Oakes. Jason, how many applications do you expect to fund? We're only hiring one founder for this opportunity. So the location has to be in Central America. Okay, so to answer that question, I can see it two ways. Are we talking about once the person is joining DSV as a founding analyst and post-incorporation? So joining us to DSV as a founding analyst, that would mean that the position is completely remote. You can stay where you are. All we actually ask of you is that you tell us our time zone, so your time zone, so then we can schedule meetings accordingly and help you through the venture building process. After incorporation, I mean, the biggest observation is that the main market is Costa Rica. So keeping in mind that there is a possibility that this person might need to relocate to Costa Rica. But that is something that we can also work with the co-founders that we hired down the line for the location. But yes, I hope I answered your question. Jasmine, does DSV support the technical feasibility testing process, access to lab space, or mostly the scope of the landscape to pursue certain avenue and then experimentally de-risk? So actually, that's a really, really good question. So during the venture building process as a founding analyst, everything is doing the research to determine where the area of innovation should be at. So there's not going to be an experiment per se that needs to happen in order to know which area are you going to focus. However, through the process of venture building, it is possible that you might have come down to the proof of concept phase where an experiment needs to happen in order to show that whatever product you develop actually is working. But for that, we rely on the partners to this program that have access to the facilities that the founder may need in order to proceed with that proof of concept. But that's, in my experience at DSV, that usually happens post incorporation. You're welcome. Allocation cost to Costa Rica will be covered by DSV. That is a really good question. So, as I mentioned, through the founder experience, you can stay wherever you are and do the venture building process to that. And if there is a relocation that needs to happen, that will happen at post incorporation of the company. But to be honest, depending on what the question you're referring to, I think it would be better if you were to send me an email, and then I can get you a concrete answer on that. But that's a really, really good question. Thank you. You're very welcome. What I would say regarding the salary, it depends on what the value you're seeing of the opportunity. So through the experience from the company will be valued at 1.1 million pounds, of which the 250,000 pounds are, well, 250,000 pounds are from that investment on that valuation. And the company, as they go, as they build more revenue and more valuation, then of course there is a potential of increasing in salary, but that is once you are incorporated. So that is post incorporation. So I hope that answers your question. I'm just wondering if the venture is born away security, or is there a possibility to perform a business model based on long-term products? That is a really good question, Juan. I have to get back to you on that one. Thank you. How is the IP distributed? So the IP is owned by the company that is incorporated. Did I answer your question, Vivian? Any more questions? Correct. Okay. So the company, yes. So the upon incorporation, the founders own 80% of the equity of the company and 20% between DSV and the partner upon incorporation. But is there evidence? It's not even a technical question, curious and based on your background, but is there evidence for a correlation between RNAi and general resistance to genetic engineering in plants? That's a very interesting question that would be explored within the context of the opportunity area. But yeah, I don't know at this moment, but that will be explored for sure. Miguel, yes, you can apply without experience on building a startup, but that would have to be compensated with having a very deep technical knowledge and ideas, which that is assessed through the interview process. So I encourage you to apply. Any more questions? Okay. What's the status between Costa Rican government and CRISPR? Well, in a survey that was done, I think it was 2 years ago, at least the Costa Ricans were acceptable of gene-edited crops, CRISPR being one of the ways of getting a gene-edited crops. And the Costa Rican government, it is unclear. At this point, the only thing that I know is that last year they were reconsidering their position in this aspect of non-transgenic gene-edited crops, but I have not seen any update on that. That's a really good question, yes. Okay, well, I think that's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for attending, as well as have a great rest of your weekend. And looking forward to your applications. Bye.